They thought it was funny. They laughed as they drove away, leaving me stranded in the middle of nowhere with nothing but the clothes on my back. I stood there, the summer heat beating down on me, dust swirling in the wake of their tires. My mother didn't even look back. My younger brother Nate, the golden child, was grinning from the back seat, and my father, the architect of my misery, simply muttered, "She'll figure it out if she's not as useless as she looks." I was 22 years old. They were throwing me away. I waited. An hour passed, then two. The laughter of my family echoed in my head as I sat on the curb outside the deserted rest stop. My phone was in the car, charging. My wallet, too. Everything I owned was inside that SUV, and they had taken it all. Panic should have set in. Maybe it did, briefly. But something else, something colder and sharper, took its place. This was supposed to be a normal summer, working at my dad's hardware store for next to nothing, coming home to cook dinner for a family that never saw me as anything more than free labor. I had spent years sacrificing for them, letting Nate have every opportunity I had to fight for. When he wanted to go to football camp, I gave up my college fund. When he needed a car, mine suddenly became his. And when he needed someone to blame for his mistakes, I was always right there, the perfect scapegoat. I stood up, brushed the dust off my jeans, and walked inside the tiny rest stop store. A bored-looking clerk glanced up. "Need something?" I smiled. "Yeah, I need a phone, and I need to disappear." I spent my last few dollars, cash I'd tucked in my back pocket, on a prepaid phone. Then, instead of calling my family, I called a legal aid office I found online. I told them my wallet was stolen, that I needed to replace my ID, that I needed to find a shelter that could help me get back on my feet. The woman on the line gave me an address. Grand Junction, 40 miles away. The second call I made was to a stranger, a trucker I had seen in the parking lot. "Hey," I said, forcing my voice to shake just enough. "My boyfriend left me here, and I have no way to get back to town. Can you help?" He hesitated, then nodded. "I can take you as far as Grand Junction." Perfect. By the time I arrived at the shelter, my name was already something else. I used an old nickname, a variation of my middle name. I wasn't ready for them to find me yet, because I knew they would look, but not because they cared. No, they would look because I was useful to them. That first night in the shelter, I didn't sleep. I sat in the corner of the common area, staring at the phone in my hand, wondering how long it would take before they realized I was really gone. The answer came the next morning. My new phone rang. Unknown number. I answered, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to hear it. "Where the hell are you?" My mother's voice hissed. "This isn't funny. You made your point. Now get back here." I could hear my father in the background. "Tell her to quit playing around. We're not driving back for her." And then Nate, laughing. "Bet she's crying somewhere. Think she finally figured out no one gives a damn?" I closed my eyes, breathed in, let the fury settle deep. "You wanted to see if I could make it on my own?" I said, my voice steady. I heard my mother inhale sharply. I smiled. "Watch me." Then I hung up and blocked the number. For the first time in my life, I belonged to no one but myself. The first days of my new life were a test of survival. I had no ID, no job, and no safety net. But I had something more valuable, an iron will and a lifetime of lessons on how to exist in the background. I knew how to make myself invisible when needed, and how to be useful when necessary. And right now, I needed to be useful. The shelter in Grand Junction was small but well run. The director, Carla, was a no-nonsense woman who had seen her share of people trying to take advantage of kindness. I told her my wallet had been stolen, which wasn't entirely a lie, and that I just needed a place to stay until I could get my feet under me. "You looking for work?" she asked, arms crossed. I nodded. "I'll do anything." She studied me, then handed me a list of local businesses that sometimes took workers off the books. "Start here, and get your ID replaced. You won't get far without it." I spent the day walking through town, asking for work. Most places brushed me off. Some gave me that look, the one that said they knew I wasn't just some unlucky girl who lost her wallet. I had been discarded, and people could sense it. But then I found the diner. Sonny's Cafe was the kind of place that smelled like coffee and cinnamon, where old men sat in the corner reading newspapers, and where the waitress knew everyone's order before they even sat down. It felt safe in a way I hadn't expected. The owner, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and tattooed arms, raised an eyebrow when I walked in. "You look like you need a job," she said, wiping her hands on a dish towel. I straightened. "I do. I can wash dishes, mop floors, whatever you need." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "We'll see what you're made of. You steal from me, you're gone. You show up late, you're gone. Understand?" "Yes, ma'am." She snorted. "It's Geraldine, and you start now." I spent the next 12 hours scrubbing dishes, wiping tables, and peeling potatoes until my fingers ached. But when Geraldine handed me $40 in cash at the end of the night and said, "Be here at 6 tomorrow," I knew I had passed the first test. That night at the shelter, I slept soundly for the first time in years. A week later, I had a rhythm. Work at the diner, save every dollar, spend my nights filling out forms to replace my lost identity. Carla helped me contact the state office for a new birth certificate. I used a payphone to call the DMV about getting a new license. Slowly, I was piecing myself back together. And then, on my 7th night in Grand Junction, my phone rang again. It was an unknown number, but I knew before I even answered. "You think you're clever, don't you?" My father's voice growled. "Blocking our numbers, running off like a brat. You made your point, now come home." I gripped the phone tighter. "Why? You need someone to clean up after you? Cook your meals? Make Nate look even better by comparison?" His tone sharpened. "You ungrateful little—" I cut him off. "I have a job, Dad. An actual job where people don't treat me like trash. And you know what? I like it." Silence. Then a chuckle, cold and condescending. "A job? What, you think you're some big shot now? You've been gone a week, sweetheart. You wouldn't last a month without us." Something inside me hardened. "Watch me. I lasted my whole life surviving you." My voice was steady. This is easy." I hung up before he could speak and turned off the phone. A month. I had a month to prove him wrong, and I would. I lasted the month, and then another, and another after that. What started as desperation became routine. I worked my shifts at Sonny's, saved every dollar I could, and made progress on reclaiming my identity. It was slow, but I was rebuilding myself piece by piece. My birth certificate came first, followed by a temporary ID. When I finally held my new driver's license in my hands, it felt like proof that I existed outside of them, outside of my family's control. Geraldine noticed. "You're different now," she said one evening as she counted the register. "Not as jumpy. You walk like you own yourself." I gave a small shrug. "Guess I finally do." She nodded like she understood. "You ever think about what's next?" I hesitated, because I had. I had spent nights at the shelter looking up online courses, thinking about finishing the degree I had never been allowed to start. Business, maybe. Finance. Something that would ensure I never needed to rely on anyone again. But saying it out loud made it real. "I've been looking at schools," I admitted. "Something online so I can keep working." Geraldine gave a knowing smile. "Good. You've got a brain in that head. Might as well use it." The first time I saw the name Nathan Calloway, I nearly ignored it. My old email, the one my family knew, was mostly a wasteland of unanswered messages from my mother and the occasional guilt-trip subject line from my father. But this name was new. I clicked. Nathan Calloway, ESQ. The email was direct. "Miss Harris, I am contacting you on behalf of your family. There are concerns regarding your recent behavior, and my clients have expressed a need to resolve this matter before legal action is considered. Please contact me at your earliest convenience. Respectfully, Nathan Calloway." Legal action. I let out a sharp laugh, leaning back in my chair at the shelter. I had been gone for months, hadn't spoken to them since the last time my father tried to belittle me over the phone. And now they were threatening me with a lawyer? I reread the email twice, my pulse steady. If they thought they could intimidate me back into submission, they were dead wrong. I typed my response carefully. "Mr. Calloway, thank you for reaching out. I would love to discuss the legal standing of my recent behavior. Please provide documentation regarding the specific claims being made against me, as well as any evidence supporting said claims. Additionally, I would like to formally request all communication be conducted in writing moving forward. Given the history of manipulation within my family, I find it best to ensure a proper record of all interactions. I look forward to your response. Best, Eliza Harris." I clicked send. Let them try to come after me. A week passed before I heard from him again. The second email was longer, laced with legal jargon designed to sound intimidating. But I picked up on the real message. My family wasn't suing me. They were panicking. They had filed a restraining order request against me, claiming I had been harassing them, making threats, and attempting to extort money. I laughed out loud, startling Carla at the shelter. "What is it?" she asked. I turned my laptop toward her. "They're trying to paint me as the threat." She scanned the email, raising an eyebrow. "They're scared." And she was right. My father's arrogance, my mother's guilt, Nate's cruelty. It all worked as long as I played my role, as long as I let them dictate my place in their world. But I had disappeared. I had thrived, and that terrified them. They needed me to be the failure. I closed my laptop, a slow smile spreading across my face. If they wanted a legal battle, I'd give them one, and I wouldn't lose. A restraining order. That was their plan. I stared at the court document, freshly emailed to me by Nathan Calloway. It was weak, full of vague claims and absolutely no evidence. They had no proof because there was no harassment, no threats, no extortion, just their desperation to make me the villain. "They're flailing," Carla observed, reading over my shoulder. "They have no case." I nodded, already drafting my response in my head. I wasn't just going to fight this. I was going to bury them in paperwork. The next morning, I walked into the Grand Junction courthouse and filed a response. I provided my employment records, lease agreement, bank statements, solid proof that I had been living independently for months. No contact, no harassment. Then I included a request of my own. A cease and desist order against my family for false allegations and defamation. By the time I left, I had another email from Calloway. "Miss Harris, I strongly advise against escalating this matter further. My clients are prepared to settle amicably." I laughed. Amicably meant they wanted me to back down before things got worse for them. I typed back, "Mr. Calloway, I welcome the opportunity to present my case in court. I suggest your clients prepare accordingly." Days passed. Then a phone call. "Miss Harris, it's Nathan Calloway. I believe we should meet." I raised an eyebrow. "Why? Your clients have already made their position clear." A pause, then in a lower tone, "They're hiding something." That got my attention. "Meet me at 2 p.m. tomorrow," I said. "Bring everything you have." Nathan Calloway was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s. Sharp suit, tired eyes, but there was something else. Hesitation, doubt. He slid a thick folder across the table. "I think you should see this." Inside were financial records, loans, debts, a foreclosure notice on my parents' house, a credit card opened in my name without my knowledge. I exhaled slowly. They were stealing from me. Nathan nodded. "And now, they need you back to fix it." I stared down at the documents, my hands steady. They hadn't just abandoned me, they had robbed me. I looked up, meeting Nathan's gaze. "Then let's make sure they regret it. Because now, this wasn't just revenge, this was war." Nathan's discovery changed everything. For months, I had been under the assumption that my family simply wanted to erase me from their lives. But now I saw the truth. They didn't just abandon me. They had been stealing from me long before they left me stranded in that parking lot. And now, their entire house of lies was collapsing. The next morning, I met Nathan at a quiet cafe downtown, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. He placed a thick folder in front of me, flipping it open to the ugliest part of my past. "They took out credit cards in your name when you were 19, he said, pointing to the first page. "Over $20,000 worth of debt, maxed out and ignored. Your father also co-signed a personal loan under your social security number, 50 grand, all defaulted. They didn't just steal from you, they ruined your financial future." I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. "Can we fight this?" Nathan nodded. "It'll take time, but yes. The easiest way is proving fraud. If we can show you never approved these accounts, we can wipe your name from them. But your parents, they'll be in deep. Credit fraud, identity theft, bank fraud, it's all serious." I exhaled slowly. "Good." Nathan studied me for a moment. "You're not hesitating." "Why should I?" I met his gaze head on. "They left me with nothing, Nathan. They laughed while they abandoned me. Then they spent years trying to make me the villain. I owe them nothing." He nodded, flipping the folder closed. "Then let's get started." The first step was filing official disputes with the credit bureaus. I went to the bank, reported the fraudulent loans, and sent notarized letters proving I had never consented to the debt. It would take time, but I was patient. In the meantime, I had another battle to fight. Nathan arranged for me to meet with a judge regarding the restraining order my parents filed against me. The goal was to have it dismissed entirely before it could go to court. We walked into the hearing room, where my mother sat with their new attorney, a slick-looking man in his 40s who didn't even bother to greet me. My mother looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her hands wringing in her lap, but it wasn't guilt. It was fear of what was coming next. "Miss Harris," the judge began, flipping through documents, "your family has accused you of harassment and intimidation. However, I see no documented evidence to support these claims. In fact," he turned the page, "it seems you've had no contact with them in over a year. Is that correct?" I nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. The only contact I've had is through their attorney, and only in response to legal threats." The judge raised an eyebrow, then turned to their lawyer. "Is there any actual evidence?" The man cleared his throat. "My clients were under the impression that Miss Harris had been making efforts to damage their reputation and personal lives through online defamation," Nathan cut in smoothly. "Objection. No proof has been provided of these claims. We would be happy to review any documented instances of this alleged defamation. Silence. The judge sighed. In the absence of proof, I see no reason to move forward with this request. The restraining order is denied. My mother paled. Their lawyer leaned toward her, whispering something, but she didn't respond. I stood, smoothing my blazer. Thank you, Your Honor. The case was over, but the war wasn't. As we walked out of the courthouse, I glanced at my mother one last time. For the first time in my life, she looked at me not as a daughter, not as a burden, but as something else entirely, as a threat, and I was just getting started. The restraining order was gone, but I knew my family well enough to realize that wasn't the end. They weren't going to roll over and accept defeat, not when their backs were against the wall. And I was right. 3 days later, Nathan called me. They've changed their strategy. I sat up straighter in my chair, my stomach tightening. What do you mean? They're claiming you're the one who financially ruined them. His voice was sharp, irritated. They're saying you took out loans in their names, that you used them to fund your life while you abandoned them. They're flipping the script. I laughed, a genuine, bitter laugh. That's insane. It is, Nathan agreed, but they're desperate. They filed a civil suit today. They're claiming damages, saying you owe them for emotional distress and financial hardship. They're trying to trap you into either settling or making yourself look guilty by fighting it. I exhaled slowly, my mind racing. They think they can scare me into backing down. Let them come, I said coldly. We're going to dismantle every single lie. The next few weeks were a blur of preparation. Nathan and I gathered every piece of evidence we had. Bank statements proving I hadn't touched their accounts, records showing the fraudulent loans, emails showing their increasing desperation to get me back. Then I found it. Buried deep in my credit report was a loan my father had taken out years ago, a second mortgage on their house. But what caught my attention wasn't the loan itself. It was the cosigner, me, a signature that wasn't mine. Nathan whistled low when I showed him. That's identity fraud, felony level. If we prove this in court, your father's looking at jail time. I stared at the document, my pulse steady. I should have felt conflicted. This was my father after all, but I didn't, because the man who abandoned me wasn't a father. He was just another thief. The day of the hearing, I walked into that courtroom not as the girl they had left behind, but as the woman they had tried, and failed, to destroy. My parents sat across from me. My mother looked exhausted, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. My father was stone-faced, but there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Fear. The judge looked over the documents, frowning. Mr. Harris, these financial records don't support your claims. In fact, they show quite the opposite. You took out multiple loans in your daughter's name, without her knowledge or consent. Do you have an explanation for this? My father's jaw tightened. She agreed to help. It was family money. Nathan stood. We have forensic analysis proving the signature was forged. This isn't family money, it's fraud. The courtroom was silent. My mother looked at my father, realization dawning in her eyes. The judge sighed, shaking his head. This case has no merit. Miss Harris, you owe your family nothing. This lawsuit is dismissed. He turned to my father. However, Mr. Harris, I strongly suggest you seek legal counsel of your own. This case may not be over for you. My father paled. I stood, smoothing my blouse, and met my mother's gaze. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. I could see it in her eyes. They had lost, and I had won, but I wasn't done yet. Not even close. They should have stopped. The case was dismissed, the fraud was exposed, and my father was now under investigation. Any rational person would have cut their losses and tried to salvage what was left. But my family wasn't rational. They were desperate. And desperation makes people reckless. Nathan called me late that evening. They're making a new move. I didn't even blink. What now? Your mother and brother are claiming you orchestrated everything, that you set them up, manipulated your father into financial ruin so you could take revenge, and they're filing another lawsuit. This time for emotional distress and defamation. I sighed, rubbing my temples. Let me guess. They're painting themselves as the victims now. The poor, innocent family left in shambles by their heartless daughter. Exactly. His voice was sharp. They're smart enough to know they can't win, but they're trying to wear you down, make you tired, make you pay just to fight back. I smiled. They thought this was a battle of endurance, but they forgot one thing. I had been surviving them my entire life. They had already taught me how to fight. Then let's turn their own game against them, I said. They want to drag this out? Fine. Let's bury them in legal hell. Nathan filed a countersuit the next day. Defamation, fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress. I was done playing defense. If they wanted war, they were going to get it. Within a week, I had gathered signed affidavits from former family friends, distant relatives, and even old neighbors, all people who had witnessed how I had been treated growing up. Statements about the way my father belittled me, how my mother enabled him, how Nate followed in his footsteps. It was all written, notarized, and entered as evidence. Then I went further. Nathan helped me subpoena my father's bank statements, all of them. I wanted every fraudulent transaction, every piece of proof that they had been using my name long before I ever left. And that's when I found it. Buried in the records was something I never expected, a life insurance policy, taken out in my name. I felt my breath catch as I scanned the document. My father had listed himself as the primary beneficiary. Nathan's expression darkened as he read over my shoulder. This is beyond fraud. This is criminal. My voice was ice. They took out life insurance on me while I was still living under their roof, with a payout clause that increased if you died under unusual circumstances, Nathan added. Jesus, Eliza, this wasn't just theft, this was premeditated. A slow chill crawled up my spine. I had known my family was cruel, but this was something else entirely. They knew I was leaving, I whispered. They planned for it. Not to help me, not to make amends. They planned to profit from me being gone. I had been so focused on proving they stole from me, so caught up in the legal battles and paperwork, that I never considered the worst possibility. Maybe leaving me stranded at that rest stop wasn't just a joke. Maybe it was intentional. Nathan met my gaze. Eliza, I think they wanted you gone permanently. I clenched my fists, fury surging through me. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice, and I was going to make sure they paid for every single thing they had done. I didn't sleep that night. The discovery of the life insurance policy was like a knife twisting in my gut, carving out any last illusions that my family had ever cared for me. By morning, my course of action was clear. Nathan and I filed a formal complaint with the district attorney's office. This wasn't just fraud, it was attempted insurance fraud, and potentially something even darker. They might try to claim it was just a precaution, Nathan warned as we walked out of the courthouse, that it's common for parents to take out policies on their kids. Except normal parents don't abandon their kids in the middle of nowhere with no way home, I shot back. And they sure as hell don't take out policies with double payout clauses for unusual circumstances. Nathan nodded grimly. We'll let the DA handle that part. Meanwhile, I have a few more cards to play. The next step was setting the trap. My mother and brother were still pushing forward with their lawsuit, desperate to bleed me dry with legal fees. But they didn't know that I had already filed a fraud report with the insurance company. They didn't know the DA's office was already looking into my father's financial history, and they sure as hell didn't know I had subpoenaed their emails. It's risky, Nathan had warned when I first suggested it. We might not find anything. We will, I had replied. People like them, they always leave a trail. And I was right. Buried in the hundreds of documents was an email from my father to an insurance broker, dated just 3 weeks before they abandoned me. Subject, policy details. Body, just confirming the payout details again. If something happens to Eliza after she turns 22, the full amount is paid out, correct? Want to make sure there won't be any issues with collection. I stared at the screen, my breath catching. My fingers curled into fists as the reality of it crashed over me like a tidal wave. They hadn't just stolen from me. They had planned for me to disappear. And if I had never made it back, if something had happened to me on the streets of a city I didn't know, they would have profited from it. We have them, Nathan said, his voice tight with fury. This is the nail in their coffin. I exhaled slowly. Not yet. What do you mean, not yet? They still think they can win, I murmured, my mind spinning. Let's make sure they walk straight into their own downfall. The deposition was set for the following week. My mother and brother would be forced to answer our questions under oath. They thought they were coming to bury me in legal threats. They had no idea I was holding the shovel. The day of the deposition, I walked into the conference room with my head held high, Nathan beside me. My mother sat across the table, looking every bit the grieving, betrayed matriarch she wanted the world to see. Nate sat beside her, his expression cold, but not as smug as usual. Let's begin, Nathan said, clicking his pen. Mrs. Harris, can you confirm whether or not you were aware of a life insurance policy taken out in Eliza's name? My mother hesitated. I don't remember. My husband handled most of our finances. So you're saying you had no knowledge of it? That's correct. Nathan slid the printed email across the table. Then can you explain why your husband was inquiring about the payout terms just before Eliza was abandoned? Her face drained of color. Next to her, Nate stiffened. I don't know what that is, she whispered. It's an email from your husband, Nathan said smoothly, confirming how much money he'd get if something happened to Eliza after her 22nd birthday, a birthday that happened days before you all left her stranded in another state. Silence. Then my brother slammed his hands on the table. This is bullshit. You know what else is bullshit? I spoke for the first time, my voice even. You trying to sue me while you and Mom were sitting on fraud charges. How do you think the judge is going to like that when we present it in court? Their lawyer shifted uncomfortably. My mother's lips trembled. Eliza, honey, we're done here, I said coldly, pushing back my chair. See you in court. Because after this, there was no way they were getting out of it. I had expected my mother to break first, but I underestimated my brother's temper. He had always been the one with a short fuse, the one who lashed out when things didn't go his way. And now, sitting across from me with his whole world unraveling, I saw the exact moment he lost control. You think you're better than us? Nate spat, his face red with fury. You think walking away gave you some kind of moral high ground? You were nothing before you left. You were nothing when we let you back into our lives, and you're nothing now. Nathan Calloway didn't even blink at the outburst. Mr. Harris, I'd caution you against making self-incriminating statements. Incriminating? Nate scoffed, throwing up his hands. What's incriminating about telling the truth? She's a selfish, conniving... Enough, my mother whispered, reaching for his arm, her hand trembling. Stop talking! For the first time, I saw it, the understanding sinking in, the realization that they weren't going to win. My mother wasn't just afraid, she was cornered, and I was about to push her over the edge. I leaned forward, placing my hands on the table. The lawsuit is over. The fraud charges? That's just beginning, and now thanks to my dear brother's temper tantrum, we have a wonderful little snippet of him admitting to letting me leave. That's going to look great in court when we discuss intent, don't you think? Nate clenched his jaw, but he wasn't stupid. He knew he had just given me more ammo than I could have hoped for. Their lawyer shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. Perhaps it's in everyone's best interest to reach a settlement. Oh, there's no settlement, I said coolly. You wanted war. This is war. And you lost. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing. Not pity, not regret, just the final, resounding clarity that I had spent years waiting for. Enjoy the time you have left before the DA files charges, I said as I stood, because once this is over, I promise you, I will never see either of you again. Nathan gathered his papers, offering me a small nod as we left the room. I walked out of that courthouse lighter than I had felt in years. The past had no more chains on me. I was free. The charges against my father were filed within the month, and my mother and Nate, desperate to save themselves, turned on him in court. Their betrayal was as predictable as it was pathetic. I never saw them again. I built a life without them, a successful business, a real home, people who actually loved me. And as for my so-called family, they faded into nothing, just like they always told me I would. Turns out they were wrong about everything.